The sun rose slowly over the small frontier town, its golden light spilling across wooden rooftops and dusty streets. But this morning carried no peace. At the edge of town, men were hammering beams together, raising a gallows. The sound of wood striking wood echoed like the drumbeat of doom. By noon, an innocent life would hang from that very platform. The townsfolk gathered early, whispering, muttering, arguing. Some came out of curiosity, others out of bitterness, and a few simply because they could not turn away from the spectacle of death. In the center of it all stood a young girl, barely 17. Her wrists were bound, her dress torn at the edges from being dragged into the sheriff's custody. Her long hair fell over her shoulders, her face pale but dignified. She was a virgin girl, pure of spirit, guilty of nothing except being too vulnerable in a town ruled by harsh laws and harsher men. Her crime? None could truly explain. Some said she was accused of theft. Others whispered that she defied a powerful man whose pride could not bear rejection. Whatever the story, the truth did not matter here. The law had already spoken. The judge, stiff and cold, declared her guilty without a fair hearing. And so, the punishment was death, by hanging. She stood silently as the crowd stared, eyes filled with pity and cruelty alike. Her lips moved in prayer, though her voice was lost in the restless murmurs around her. Somewhere in the crowd a woman sobbed softly, while others urged the sheriff to hurry with the execution. The sheriff himself stood tall and grim, his badge gleaming under the morning sun. To him this was nothing more than duty. The law was clear and mercy had no place in his heart, but if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen the fear trembling in the girl's hands. Not fear of death itself, but of leaving this world without ever being understood, without ever being loved, without anyone to fight for her, when she could no longer fight for herself. The gallows loomed larger with each passing minute. The rope swung gently in the wind, waiting to claim her fragile neck. The executioner tested the knots, tugging the coarse fibers with practiced hands. Every detail was prepared. All that remained was for the sheriff to give the signal. And yet, in that heavy silence, something stirred. The town, blind in its thirst for judgment, had no idea that destiny was about to intervene. A shadow was already approaching from beyond the hills, a rider on a strong black horse. He carried no fear of the sheriff's law, for he belonged to another law altogether, the law of his people and the law of justice. This was no ordinary stranger. He was a Comanche warrior, hardened by battles, scarred by loss, yet still unbroken in spirit. And he had come to stop the hanging of the innocent girl, even if it meant challenging every man in that town. The black horse's hooves struck the ground like thunder as it approached the town. Dust swirled in its wake, and men turned their heads toward the horizon. The sheriff squinted, shading his eyes beneath the brim of his hat. By the time he recognized the rider, the murmurs had already spread through the crowd. "A Comanche," someone whispered. Another spat on the ground. "What business does he have here?" A third voice trembled. "That's Grey Wolf, the one they call the last free warrior." The horse came to a stop just outside the circle of townsfolk. The rider sat tall, his dark braids falling over his shoulders, a necklace of carved bone resting against his chest. His face bore the stern calm of a man who had stared death in the eyes many times before. His gaze swept over the gallows, over the girl trembling before the rope, and then locked on the sheriff. "You will not hang her," he said, his voice deep, steady, carrying across the square like a challenge. The sheriff stiffened, his jaw tightening. "This is no concern of yours?" "Savage. She's been tried, found guilty by the law of this town, and the law will be carried out." Grey Wolf dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. He stepped forward, each movement measured, controlled, but filled with the weight of unspoken defiance. "I know your law," he said slowly, "a law that condemns the innocent and shields the powerful. I know it because I have seen it before, but I will not watch it take her life." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some men muttered angrily about outsiders meddling in their justice, yet others found themselves silently agreeing. They had watched the girl dragged to the cell. They had seen her eyes filled with fear, and though their voices were weak, their hearts whispered that this was wrong. The sheriff placed his hand on the butt of his revolver. "You're a long way from your people, Comanche. Don't mistake your bold tongue for protection. One word from me and this crowd will tear you down." But Grey Wolf didn't flinch. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the sheriff. "Then let them tear me down. But before they do, I promise you this. Not one man will raise a hand to her while I still draw breath." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Never had anyone dared defy the sheriff so openly. The executioner stepped back, uncertain. The girl lifted her head for the first time, her tear-stained eyes locking on the warrior. In her chest flickered a fragile spark of hope. The judge, red-faced and trembling with indignation, barked from the platform. "This is outrageous. This man has no voice here, no standing before this court. Sheriff, arrest him at once." But the sheriff hesitated. He had heard tales of Grey Wolf, how he had led raids that shattered entire patrols, how he had ridden against odds that no man should have survived. To draw steel against such a man in front of the entire town was a risk even he did not take lightly. "You claim our law is unjust," the sheriff finally said, his voice low but sharp. "What would you put in its place? The law of the wild? The law of the Comanche?" Grey Wolf's expression hardened. "The law of truth, of justice, where proof matters more than pride, and mercy is not weakness but strength." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "If you believe your law is fair, then let her speak. Let her face those who accuse her. Let the truth decide, not your gallows." The crowd stirred again. For the first time, people's eyes shifted from the sheriff to the girl. Whispers grew into open voices. "She never had a hearing. I never saw evidence against her. Maybe she is innocent." The sheriff growled under his breath, realizing the balance of the crowd was tipping. His control, his authority, his law, all were being undermined by the presence of this single warrior. The judge slammed his hand on the railing. "Enough! The sentence is passed. Execution will proceed. Now!" The executioner, trembling, reached for the rope. The girl gasped softly, closing her eyes as the noose came closer. But before it could tighten, Grey Wolf stepped forward, placing himself between her and the gallows. His hand rested on the hilt of the knife at his belt. "Then you'll have to kill me first," he said, his voice like steel. The square fell silent. The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun. The townsfolk held their breath, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to stop. A warrior had drawn a line against the law of the town, and everyone knew nothing would ever be the same again. The crowd's silence felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Every eye in the square was locked on the Comanche warrior, who now stood like a shield between the trembling girl and the gallows. The sheriff's hand hovered over his revolver, but he hesitated, calculating. One rash move, one wrong order, and the entire town could erupt into chaos. Grey Wolf broke the silence first. "If your law cannot endure the truth, then it is no law at all. Let her speak. Let her face those who accuse her." The sheriff scowled, but before he could reply, a woman's voice rang out from the crowd. "He's right, she never had her say." Others joined, emboldened. "The girl deserves a hearing. She's just a child. This ain't justice. It's murder." The judge's face turned crimson with rage. He banged his fist on the rail. "Silence! I will not have my authority challenged." But his command only stirred more unease. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the once united mob began to fracture. The girl's eyes lifted, locking on the warrior's broad shoulders. For the first time since her arrest, she felt a flicker of safety. The noose still dangled above her head, but now there was a man who dared to stand in its way. The sheriff, seeing the tension rising, tried another tactic. "Fine," he muttered through gritted teeth. "She can speak, but her words won't change the sentence." Grey Wolf turned to the girl, his gaze steady yet gentle. "Tell them," he urged softly. "Tell them the truth." Her lips trembled, her voice weak from days in the cell. But with the warrior's presence beside her, courage found its way into her chest. She raised her chin, her words breaking the silence. "I stole nothing, I hurt no one. I am guilty only of saying no to a man who would not hear it. He wanted me to belong to him, and when I refused, he swore he would see me destroyed." A murmur swept through the crowd. Heads turned. Eyes searched. Somewhere among them stood the real accuser, a man of influence, one who had hidden behind the law to settle his pride. The sheriff stiffened, uneasy, but Grey Wolf pressed further. Who is this man? Let him step forward, if he has the courage, to face her words. Silence. The townsfolk shifted, glancing at one another. The girl's gaze scanned the crowd, then faltered as her eyes caught a figure near the back. A man well-dressed, his hat pulled low, face pale beneath his beard, turned quickly as if to slip away unnoticed. "There," she cried, pointing with trembling hands. "That's him, Mr. Harlan." Gasps rippled. The name carried weight. Harlan was no ordinary citizen. He was one of the wealthiest landowners in the county, a man whose pockets lined the judge's coat and whose influence kept the sheriff's office afloat. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough of this nonsense. Do not listen to her lies." But the people were no longer silent. "Is it true?" someone shouted. "Did Harlan accuse her?" Another spat. "If she refused him, no wonder he wanted her gone." The crowd was shifting, their faith in the law crumbling with each passing second. Harlan's face twisted with anger. "She lies. She's nothing but a filthy—" Before the insult could leave his lips, Grey Wolf stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "Choose your words carefully, white man. For each word you speak against her, you speak against me." The square fell still again. The Comanche warrior, standing tall and unyielding, had placed his honor beside the girl's. No one dared mock her now, not while he lived. The girl looked at him, her chest tightening. He was a stranger, a man from a people the town had long feared, and yet he was the only one willing to believe her, the only one who saw her as more than an accusation. For the first time tears welled in her eyes, not of fear but of gratitude. "Why do you help me?" she whispered. Grey Wolf's expression softened for the briefest moment. "Because no one helped my sister when she needed it most, and I swore I would never again stand by while the innocent suffered." The girl's heart ached at his words, sensing the depth of his pain. In that moment a bond was forged, not of blood, not of tribe, but of shared injustice. But even as that fragile connection grew, danger thickened in the air. The sheriff's patience had thinned to breaking. His voice boomed over the restless crowd. "This has gone far enough. If the law of this town is to survive, then order must be restored. If this warrior wants to defy us, then let him face the full consequences." Hands reached for weapons, men stepped forward, and just like that, the square became a powder keg, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite. Grey Wolf shifted his stance, his hand brushing the hilt of his knife, his body coiled like a mountain lion ready to strike. Behind him, the girl trembled. Clutching the rope still tied around her wrists, she whispered one word almost like a prayer, "Please." And the Comanche warrior answered without turning his head, his voice low and fierce, "They will not take you. Not while I stand." The square was no longer silent. Angry voices rose like a storm, some shouting for the girl's freedom, others demanding the sheriff put an end to this chaos. The air trembled with fury and fear, and every man's hand hovered near his weapon. The judge's voice cracked through the uproar. "Sheriff, do your duty. Arrest that savage before this town." Tears itself apart, the sheriff's jaw tightened. He had ruled this town for years, his authority unquestioned, but now it trembled under the weight of the warrior's defiance and the people's doubt. His eyes narrowed on Grey Wolf. "You've made a mistake coming here, Comanche. Whatever grief you carry, it's not your place to interfere." Grey Wolf's voice was steady, calm, yet edged with steel. "When a law condemns the innocent, it is not law, it is tyranny. And tyranny is every man's enemy, whether he stands inside these walls or beyond them." Some of the crowd murmured in agreement, but others shouted back, fueled by fear. "He's no better than a raider. Savage blood has no right to speak of justice." Grey Wolf stood unmoved, his dark eyes scanning the restless sea of faces. "I know what you call me. I've heard your words all my life. But tell me this. When your daughters cry for mercy, do you not hear them the same as mine? When your wives beg for protection, do their tears weigh less because of the color of their skin?" The words struck deep. Some townsfolk lowered their heads ashamed, but others sneered, unwilling to admit their prejudice. Harlan, red with fury, stepped forward, pointing an accusing finger. "This is exactly what I warned you of, Sheriff. These savages bring nothing but chaos. He speaks of justice, but what he wants is to tear down our law and rule us with fear. Look at him, Armed, defiant, threatening your authority. If you don't stop him, you'll lose this town." The judge slammed his gavel on the railing, his face purple with rage. "Enough debate. This girl is guilty, and guilty she will remain. Sheriff, order the executioner to proceed, and if the savage interferes, shoot him where he stands." The executioner, trembling, looked at the sheriff, waiting for his nod. The girl's breath caught in her throat as the rope brushed her shoulder. Her knees weakened and she whispered, "Please, don't let them." Grey Wolf stepped back slightly, placing himself directly between her and the noose once more. His hand rested on the knife at his belt, the leather grip worn from years of use. His voice was quiet, but the kind of quiet that carried more weight than any shout. "If one drop of her blood is spilled today, Sheriff, then yours will follow it." The crowd gasped. It was open defiance, a direct challenge to the lawman's authority. The sheriff's face hardened. Slowly he drew his revolver, the steel glinting in the sun. "Then it ends here," he growled. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to beg them all to stop, but no sound left her lips. Her entire world now balanced on the hair trigger of a gun. Men in the crowd began shouting again, their division clear. "Free the girl! Obey the law! Hang her! Let her go!" The square shook with chaos, but all of it faded into silence in the girl's mind as she stared at the sheriff's finger curling on the trigger. Then a sudden voice rang out, one of the townsfolk, an older man with a weathered face. "Sheriff, wait, she deserves a fair trial. If you hang her now, you'll hang this town's honor with her." Others joined him, louder this time. "No hanging without proof. Let her speak again. We've followed your law. Long enough. It's time for justice." The sheriff's revolver wavered, his arm tense as the pressure of the crowd pressed against him. He could sense control slipping away like water through his fingers. Harlan shouted desperately, "Don't listen to them. She's guilty. And if you don't hang her, every man here will see you as weak." The judge added, "Do it now, Sheriff, before it's too late." The sheriff's eyes flicked between the trembling girl, the defiant warrior, and the restless mob. His breath came heavy, sweat glistening on his brow. He had never faced a moment like this, his authority pitted against both his people's doubts and a warrior's unshakable courage. Finally, his voice cut through the clamor, raw with anger. "If it's a fight you want, Comanche, then by God you'll have one. But know this, when the dust settles, she will still hang." He cocked the revolver, aiming squarely at Grey Wolf. The crowd froze. The girl gasped, and Grey Wolf's eyes narrowed, calm as the storm before it breaks. The square was frozen in silence. The sheriff's revolver gleamed in the harsh midday sun, aimed squarely at the Comanche warrior. Dust drifted lazily in the air, but no one dared to move. The girl's breath came in short gasps, her eyes wide, fixed on the barrel of the gun. That could end the only life willing to save hers. Grey Wolf did not flinch. His gaze stayed locked on the sheriff, calm and unyielding, like stone facing a storm. "You can pull that trigger," he said, his voice low and steady, "but you'll never silence the truth." The words struck deep, but the sheriff's pride was stronger than reason. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then chaos erupted. Shout tore through the crowd. "Don't shoot him!" Another voice countered. "Obey the law!" People shoved and cursed, fear and anger colliding. In the confusion, a man hurled a stone toward the gallows. It struck the wooden post with a loud crack, startling the executioner. He stumbled, dropping the rope from his hands. That single slip was the spark the square had been waiting for. The powder keg ignited. Men surged forward, some toward the sheriff in anger, others toward Grey Wolf in hostility. Women screamed, children cried, and the once-ordered execution turned into a storm of fists and fury. The sheriff fired his revolver. The shot split the air, echoing like thunder. Dust exploded at Grey Wolf's feet, the bullet missing by inches. The warrior moved like lightning, closing the distance. His hand shot forward, knocking the revolver from the sheriff's grip. The weapon clattered to the ground, swallowed by the trampling crowd. Gasps erupted. The balance had shifted. The judge bellowed from the platform, his voice trembling with fury. "This is rebellion. Stop them, Sheriff, stop him." But the sheriff, shaken and unarmed, scrambled backward, struggling to regain control. Grey Wolf turned. his back shielding the girl as the crowd pressed closer. "Stay behind me," he commanded. His knife flashed in the light, not raised to kill but to warn. The girl clutched her bound wrists to her chest, her heart hammering. Fear twisted through her body, but something stronger began to take root. Hope. For the first time she believed she might survive. But Harlan, desperate and enraged, saw his control slipping. His face contorted with hate as he pushed through the chaos. In his hand gleamed the cold steel of a pistol. "If the sheriff won't do it," he snarled, "then I will." The girl's scream cut through the madness as Harlan raised his weapon. Gray. Wolf spun, his instincts faster than thought. He lunged, driving his shoulder into Harlan's chest. The pistol went off with a deafening crack, the bullet slicing through the air harmlessly into the sky. The two men crashed to the dirt, the pistol tumbling away. A roar erupted from the crowd. Some surged to help the warrior, others to drag him down. Fists flew, boots kicked, voices shouted curses and prayers alike. Grey Wolf rose, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut above his brow. He grabbed Harlan by the collar and flung him against the gallows post. "Confess," he thundered. "Tell them the truth, that you condemned her because she refused you." Harlan's face twisted with rage and fear. "Never," he spat. "She's nothing. She's—" Before he could finish, a townsman shouted, "I heard him. Weeks ago, he swore he'd ruin her if she wouldn't have him." Another voice joined. I heard it too." The crowd's fury shifted. Eyes turned not on the girl but on Harlan. Murmurs grew into shouts. "He's the liar." "Hang him, not her." The judge pounded his fist on the railing, desperate. "This is lawlessness. You can't—" But his voice drowned beneath the wave of the people. The sheriff staggered to his feet, his authority broken, his face pale. For the first time he looked not like a man of law, but like a man cornered. The girl, her wrists still bound, gazed up at Grey Wolf. He stood tall despite the blood on his face, his chest heaving with breath, his eyes fierce but steady. "She whispered, her voice trembling, "You saved me." Grey Wolf glanced at her briefly, then back to the mob pressing closer around them. "Not yet," he said. "But we're closer than we were." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the square boiled with unrest. The noose still swung in the wind, untouched, waiting. But its shadow no longer hung over the girl alone. It now hung over the whole town, over its law, its leaders, and its conscience. And everyone knew. There was no going back. The square lay in shambles. Dust and blood stained the dirt. The gallows. Rope swung idly in the breeze, and the people who had gathered for an execution now stood shaken, faces pale, eyes heavy with doubt. The sheriff, bruised and weaponless, leaned against the platform, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. His badge caught the fading sunlight, but it no longer seemed to shine with authority. Around him the townsfolk murmured, not with obedience but with suspicion and anger. Harlan, pinned against the gallows post by two men who had once called him friend, spat curses and thrashed. His pride was gone, stripped bare before all. His lies had cracked, and the people could now see the rot beneath them. The judge pounded his fist on the railing of the platform, his voice hoarse. "You fools, you let a savage turn you against the law, do you not see? Without order we are nothing." But no one answered him. His words, once iron, now rang hollow. The crowd had tasted something stronger than fear. They had tasted truth. Grey. Wolf stood in the center of the square, the girl still behind him. His brow bled from the fight, but his posture was tall, his gaze steady. He scanned the people, then spoke with quiet strength. "You speak of order," he said, his eyes lifting toward the judge. "But what is order if it condemns the innocent and protects the guilty? You speak of law, but a law twisted by men like him," he gestured toward Harlan, "is no law at all." A silence settled over the square. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, their faces caught between shame and awakening. At last the girl's voice broke through. Though her hands were still bound, she stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "I never stole, I never lied, I never hurt anyone." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "My only crime was saying no to a man who thought his pride mattered more than my life." Every eye turned to her. Her words carried a purity no gavel or gun could silence. The crowd stirred, whispers running like ripples across water. An older woman near them front Her grey hair pulled tight in a bun, spoke softly but firmly. "She's right. We all knew Harlan's temper. We just turned our heads." Another voice rose, a young man's, bitter with regret. "And we let the law do the rest." Because it was easier than questioning it, the murmurs grew louder, swelling into anger, but this time not at the girl. Their eyes turned on the sheriff, the judge, and Harlan, the men who had twisted justice for power. The sheriff's shoulders sagged. His voice, when it came, was low, burdened. "Maybe—" He looked down at his own hands, calloused and stained with dust. "Maybe we've been blind. Law ain't worth a damn if it breaks the very people it's meant to protect." The judge snarled. "Sheriff, hold your tongue!" "You swore an oath." "I swore," the sheriff cut him off, his voice rising, "to uphold justice, and justice ain't what we've been given." A hush fell. For the first time, the townsfolk saw their lawman not as their master, but as a man wrestling with his own conscience. The girl's tears streaked her cheeks, but they weren't tears of despair this time. She looked at Grey Wolf, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you come? Why risk everything for me?" Grey Wolf's eyes softened, though his voice carried the same quiet strength. "Because your life matters. Because every life matters. My people, your people, we are not so different. And if one innocent girl hangs today, then the rope will tighten around all of us tomorrow." The words struck deep. A silence, not of fear, but of reflection, settled over the crowd. Even those who had shouted for her death now lowered their heads, ashamed. One by one, voices rose, not in anger this time, but in resolve. She must be freed. Cut the ropes. Let the girl live. The sheriff glanced at the judge, whose face was purple with rage, then at Harlan, whose mouth still frothed with curses. Finally, he reached for the knife at his belt and stepped toward the girl. The crowd watched breathless as the blade sliced through the rough hemp that bound her wrists. The ropes fell away, and for the first time in weeks, her hands were free. Cheer broke, not wild, not vengeful, but weary, relieved, and hopeful. The people had chosen. The girl collapsed into tears, her knees trembling. Grey Wolf steadied her with a hand, his eyes scanning the crowd, watchful still. But in their faces he saw something he had never expected to see from them. Respect. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the square. The gallows still stood, its rope swaying gently, but it no longer hung over her neck. Instead, it loomed as a reminder of what nearly happened, and what the town had narrowly escaped becoming. The ropes lay in the dirt, severed and useless. For the first time since her arrest, the girl stood with her wrists unbound, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her chest. She inhaled a shaky breath, air that no longer tasted of fear, but of freedom. The people of the town, who had once gathered to watch her die, now stood in uneasy silence. Some still looked ashamed, others thoughtful, and a few hopeful. The gallows loomed behind them, but its power had vanished. What had once been a tool of authority now looked like nothing more than wood and rope. Grey Wolf released her shoulder gently, giving her space to stand on her own. His eyes, calm but alert, scanned the crowd. He knew that though the girl was free, danger had not fully passed. The judge's voice, bitter and cracked, broke the silence. "This is madness. A town that turns against its own law is no town at you. You'll see, you'll collapse into ruin without order." But his words carried no weight. The people turned away from him, their faces hardened. His gavel, once the symbol of authority, now looked like a toy in the hands of a man who had lost his place. The sheriff approached slowly. His revolver was gone, his pride broken, but something new lingered in his eyes. Humility. He stopped a few paces from Grey Wolf and the girl, his voice rough. "I can't take back what I allowed. I let fear and pride blind me. But this town deserves better, and so do you." He turned toward the crowd, his voice carrying further. "From this day on, no one will hang without proof. No one will be condemned without a fair trial. If we call ourselves a town of law, then it's time we start acting like it." Murmurs rose, but they weren't angry. They were agreeing. Heads nodded. The weight of his words was not lost. Harlan, still pinned to the post by two townsmen, thrashed wildly. "You fools, you can't do this. She's guilty. I'll see her swing yet." One of the men holding him sneered, shoving him harder against the wood. "No, Harlan. You'll see the inside of a cell. The sheriff gave a slow nod. Lock him up. He'll face trial for his lies and for nearly killing an innocent girl. The people roared their approval. Justice at last had shifted course. The girl turned to Grey Wolf, her eyes shimmering with tears. You saved me. When no one else would, you stood here for me. Grey Wolf shook his head gently. No, you saved yourself when you spoke the truth. I only gave you the chance to be heard. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes still glistened. Then I'll never forget you. The warrior nodded once, his face calm, unreadable, but his eyes carried a depth that told her he would never forget either. As the townsfolk began to disperse, the gallows left behind as a grim reminder, the sheriff approached Grey Wolf again. He extended his hand awkwardly, his voice quiet. You've shown us what we should have seen long ago. If you'll take my hand, I'd call you brother. Grey Wolf studied him for a moment, then clasped his hand firmly. A brother keeps his word, he said. Remember yours. The sheriff nodded, shame and resolve mingling in his eyes. With the matter settled, Grey Wolf turned toward the horizon. His horse waited at the edge of town, its dark mane shifting in the evening wind. He walked with quiet purpose, his figure tall and unbent, as though the burden of the day weighed nothing upon him. The girl watched him go, her hands clasped at her chest. For the rest of her life, she would remember the image of the warrior, walking away from the town that had nearly ended her. He had come like a storm, fierce, sudden and unstoppable, and left behind calm, justice and hope. As the sun sank low, casting the sky in gold and crimson, the people began to rebuild, not with wood and nails, but with truth and humility. The gallows would stand for a while yet, but never again would it claim an innocent life. For they had learned that justice is not a rope, or a gavel, or a gun. Justice is the courage to stand for what is right, even when the whole world shouts for wrong. And somewhere on the horizon, a lone Comanche warrior rode beneath the dying sun, leaving behind a town forever changed.